Unitarian Church of Montreal to respond in responsibility to my protest, but chose not to. So anyway, I'm not sure I'm getting the name right, but I'm pretty sure this fellow is a former president of the board. So we got the current president of the board, former president of the board, Reverend Diane Rollert, who is a grandmother. They're, I guess, going to have a little procession into the church at some point. So anyway, getting back to the whole thing about inspiring and what they inspire, Reverend Ray Drennan's essentially quite arrogant and less than polite wrong message opinion editorial inspired 50 or so people to write letters to the editor of the Montreal Gazette condemning his anti-religious intolerance and bigotry. 5 of them were published, so 10% or so of the letters to the editor that were inspired by Reverend Ray Drennan's anti-religious intolerance and bigotry were published in the Gazette. It didn't include my letter. So we got some people showing up here, and so yeah. So the point I'm making here is that some of the things that the Unitarian Church of Montreal inspires aren't really all that good. Well, I think the letters to the editor that were inspired by Reverend Ray Drennan's anti-religious intolerance, of course, were very good, but they were inspired by very bad behavior on the part of Reverend Ray Drennan. So that's my point here, is that the things that members of the Unitarian Church of Montreal inspire don't always reflect very well on Unitarian Universalism. And then challenges. What does the Unitarian Church of Montreal challenge? Well, amongst other things, it's repeatedly challenged my right to protest against clergy abuse of all kinds, both sexual and non-sexual. The anti-religious intolerance and bigotry I've already spoken about, and various other injustices and abuses. So, some of the things that the Unitarian Church of Montreal challenges and tries to prevent happening are actually good things. Together we take action in the world. Well, I've already, essentially spoken about a bunch of immoral, unethical, borderline criminal, actually criminal, and quite frankly, in some cases, batshit crazy actions that Montreal Unitarians and Unitarian Universalists more generally have taken in the world. I mean, I could go on and on and on about various other actions of Montreal Unitarians and also other Unitarian Universalists that are quite negative, immoral, unethical, borderline criminal, actually criminal, evil, and yes, batshit crazy. Anyhow, I think I'm just going to circulate. We got people showing up here, and so I'm going to make sure they see my picket signs. We shall circulate a bit. Got some young people on the corner there. I don't know whether they're talking about. Oh yes, that's Chloe. Chloe Hart is one of the people who has erased. I'm not sure if that's Chloe Hart actually. Might be someone else. If I remember correctly, Chloe Hart is a redhead, but could be a dye job or something. But anyway, it may not be Chloe Hart. But speaking of Chloe Hart, she's a young, university student age Montreal Unitarian who has taken action in the world by erasing my chalk slogans that protest against Unitarian Universalist misuse of blasphemy law to cover up and hide such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape committed by certain Unitarian Universalist ministers. If you find that language a little vague, certain Unitarian Universalist ministers, it's quite deliberate. I'm quoting the, what's funny?
No, nothing.
Right. So, okay. Let's see here. Okay, so you think it's funny that Unitarian Universalist misuse blasphemy law to cover up pedophilia and rape committed by Unitarian Universalist ministers? Is that a little joke for you, perhaps? Yeah, I hope you're really proud of yourself, sir, being such a two-faced hypocrite. So, anyhow, so this young lady laughed at me. I wasn't certain whether she was attending the Unitarian Church of Montreal or not. But let's see what was in my picket signs. Oh, actually, I have to. It could be that she was laughing at or with. She might have been laughing with me because actually in my left hand, and she was looking at my picket signs, in my left hand the picket sign says unsafe sect, which is obviously a play on words. And yes, it's intended to be somewhat wryly humorous, so I might have misinterpreted her laughing. She might have not have been laughing at me, she might have been laughing with me. And in my right hand, atheist UUs are accusing me of blasphemy. Again, that's pretty funny when you think about it, that atheists would accuse someone of blasphemy, especially in the 21st century. Just ludicrous and laughable. So I might have been a bit untoward, and I might have misinterpreted her laughter. She might have been laughing with me and with my picket signs rather than laughing at them. Because yes, it's funny in pretty much every sense of the word that Unitarian Universalism can be reasonably described as an unsafe sect. And it's also funny in every sense of the word that atheist Unitarian Universalists could falsely accuse yours truly of the criminal act of blasphemous libel in the 21st century in an effort to cover up and hide such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape committed by certain Unitarian Universalist ministers. And getting back to the vague language, certain Unitarian Universalists, I'm being deliberately vague. This is an exact quote from the cease and desist demand letters, 2 of them, that I was served, in which I was accused of making unfounded and vicious allegations to the effect that ministers of the Unitarian Universalist Association engage in such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape. The lawyer in question, Maître Marc-André Coulombe, never identified by name the Unitarian Universalists who I was in fact saying were guilty of such despicable crimes as pedophilia and or rape. He just used these vague terms in his letter. Well, the reason I'm allowing his vague terminology to stand like this is I want people to go and try and find out, who are these ministers? Who are these certain Unitarian Universalist ministers that I have accused of being guilty of such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape? Who are these certain Unitarian Universalist ministers that actually are guilty of such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape. You're not going to find a whole lot out there in public. You'll find a small handful of publicly available cases of pedophilia and rape committed by Unitarian Universalist ministers, and in most cases where you can find information about Unitarian Universalist ministers who are guilty of pedophilia and or rape, to say nothing of Sunday school teachers who are guilty of pedophilia and or rape, they're not named. There's really, off the top of my head, I can think of a very small handful of Unitarian Universalist ministers who are credibly accused of or have actually been convicted of pedophilia and or rape. And when I use the term rape, we'll use it in perhaps the broader sense of sexual assault. Rape has a very narrow definition, but it also, especially recently, thanks to Montreal Unitarian Sue Montgomery, has been used in a way that maybe broadens the definition of the word rape to include non-consensual sex and even perhaps other forms of sexual assault that aren't necessarily sexual intercourse per se. So Sue Montgomery has helped to broaden the definition of rape. So in that sense, again, there's still only a small number of Unitarian Universalist ministers and or Unitarian Universalist Sunday school teachers who have been publicly named as being guilty of pedophilia and or rape. But there are more cases where they speak about ministers of the Unitarian Universalist religious community